everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Giving Pets a Voice, a discussion with some of the best minds in pet communication. It is a real honor to be here alongside this very impressive panel of experts. I'll let each of them introduce themselves. I am Dr. Annie Valeska, a pet behaviorist with Purina. And on behalf of Purina and our partners at Templeton World Charity Foundation and Worldview Studio, we are so glad that you're here with us today. Our focus over the next hour or so will be to help explain and illuminate the work happening around pet communication. So we're going to try to answer some of your questions, maybe dispel some myths, and ultimately help pet lovers understand the science behind pet communication and the use of soundboard buttons. So I would like to introduce our panel by having them tell us a little bit about themselves and their background briefly, and also get the gears turning by telling me that if you could ask your pet any question and get a clear answer, what would that question be? So we will start with Alexis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Devine. I am the guardian to Bunny the dog. She uses about 100 buttons to communicate with me, to tell me some very interesting things, let me know how she wants to structure her day, when and where she's in pain, and even sometimes it seems to talk about her dreams. I'm an author and an artist, and if I could ask her one question, it would probably be, what is the one thing I can do for you every day that will greatly increase your quality of life?
Love that question. Thanks, Alexis. Brian?
I'm Brian Hare. I'm director of the Canine Cognition Center at Duke University, and we've been in part funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation and worked with Purina before, so it's wonderful to be back with you again. A question I would ask my current dog, I don't know, probably, how come he keeps hugging the kids more than me? Maybe that would be what I'd ask you.
You might not want to know the answer to that one. Thanks, Brian. Heidi.
I am Dr. Heidi Lin. I am director of the C3PO lab at the University of South Alabama. I work in both the Department of Psychology and the Department of Marine Science because I study a sort of wide range of animals. My standard line is when I was a kid, I wanted to be Dr. Dolittle. And so I joined a bunch of language studies so that I get to be a little bit like Dr. Dolittle. If I could ask my dogs anything, mostly I just want to ask them why. Just general. But also, I would really like to know more specifically, animals are really good at hiding when they're in pain or when they're not feeling well. And so getting clear answers about when they are not feeling great would be incredibly useful.
We'll talk a little bit more about that later in this hour. And last but certainly not least, Federico.
Hi, I'm Federico Rossano, and I'm the director of the Comparative Cognition Lab at UC San Diego. I've been working with non-human primates for a long time and also with humans, and I'm now very excited to be conducting this very large study with dogs and cats. The question that I would like to ask is probably, who's your favorite human in the house? No, seriously, I think, having kids, little kids, the question I like to ask them is like, what would you like to start the day asking pets? What would you like to do today? What do you think would be fun today?
Awesome. Well, welcome all of you. We're going to get right to it. So sound buttons are going to be a major topic of conversation today. They are a fascinating tool for our pets. For those of you watching that haven't seen them in action, we've got a few videos to give you some examples. We'll start with Alexis's dog, Bunny, using her buttons.
Why are you mad? Why mad? Where is your ouch? Where ouch? In your ear? Where, stranger? In your paw? Let me see your paw. Okay, I'm gonna put this down. This was the stranger in her paw. She's got a mat between her toes, and that's stuck in it. Now I'm gonna have to figure out how to remove the mat between her toes.
It's one of my favorite button videos. And of course, cats also use the buttons. So up next is Flounder the cat using their soundboard.
Flounder's harness was becoming unreliable due to wear and tear, so I ended up getting her a new harness. When I first put it on her, she seemed to like it. She was walking around fine, but then when we came inside, she said this.
Flounder, sit. 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 Can you sit down? Tired. Are you tired? Sit outside. Belly. You have a tired belly. What's that mean? What does that mean? Can you tell me more? Oh, you don't want this? Are you tired of this on your belly? You don't want this on your belly? Yeah, okay. Let's get that off your belly. Let's get it off your belly then. Yeah. Okay. Good girl.
I later figured out that I had to loosen it because it was too tight for her. So once I loosened it, she was back to her normal self running around, and this is her new favorite harness.
Very intriguing examples of button use there. Panelists, let's start with the big picture. I know this is an incredibly complex issue, but could each of you try to summarize your perspective on pet buttons in just a sentence or two? Alexis, do you want to tell us about your 1 to 2 sentence perspective on buttons?
Sure. It's evolved over the last 6 years with Bunny, but the way I look at it now, especially within the fluid pet community, we tend to view buttons as a tool to give our animal companions choice, control, and agency. But I also really see it as a powerful tool for changing and shifting a framework in humans, for activating this sort of method that leads to them listening in a different way. There's something as anthropocentric as it is that when we hear a non-human speaking in our language, we're able to see how much more they have to say, how much potential they have. So I see a lot of change happening in the humans living with the animals and how they're listening and how they're paying attention and how they're offering more choice.
Love that perspective. Heidi, what do you make of the buttons?
I think that was an excellent answer. I also am intrigued by the idea, what we're seeing in some of the early science at least, is that in dogs especially, there's sort of this proportion of dogs who are very good at using the buttons and maybe a proportion of dogs who use it a little bit more simply and maybe only a couple of buttons. And the question as a scientist, of course, is what's going on in their minds, and are the dogs who are good at this different somehow than the dogs who are not good at this? And it doesn't mean that they're communicating less, but maybe we need to look at them or pay attention to them differently.
Love that. And we'll talk more about those studies later in the panel. Brian, what's your take on the buttons?
Well, my take is I think it's really fun. I think people are interacting with their dogs in a new way. And I think, as previously was said, I think it's helping people learn things about their dog they might not have known before or been able to interact. As a scientist, though, the caveat is I'm, a trained skeptic. And so if you ask me what exactly is the dog doing, that's a whole nother question.
That's fair. I think Federico is unfortunately having some technical issues, so we'll come back around for his answer to this question later, and we'll hear a lot more from him about the science that he's been involved with in terms of the buttons. But for now, I think when I posted about this panel on my socials, I had a ton of questions about just how to use them. So Alexis, I would like to start there with you. You use these buttons with your dogs on a daily basis and have taught probably thousands of people at this point how to use them with their own pets. Could you just briefly go over the basics of how they work, what training looks like, and a few practical tips for folks that might want to get started with these buttons with their own dogs or cats?
Absolutely. I think when it comes down to it, this is just associative learning. I also think that people tend to overthink it, right? When you have a baby and you hold up an apple and you show it to the baby and you say the word apple enough times in conjunction with that action, they're going to learn the word apple. So when I start teaching buttons and when I help other people use buttons with their non-humans, I suggest starting with 3 different words so that they can immediately learn to discriminate, and picking words that are highly motivating to the individual and that are really easy to model multiple times a day at the board and to say yes to a lot. So categories I recommend, like a play category, maybe your dog's really motivated by ball or chase or flirt pole or just the word play. And then like an affiliative category. So snuggles or scritches or pets or love or cuddles or whatever that may be. And then something food related. In the beginning, we didn't recommend starting with a food related button, but it's such an easy concept to model and reinforce rapidly at the board. You don't have to have a dinner button because obviously you can't say yes to dinner 12 times a day, But you can have pieces of kibble and say yes 30 times in a row. Just press that kibble button or a snack button, toss a piece of kibble, reinforce. And doing that multiple times a day will give your learner the opportunity to start opting in, to get curious, and they're getting a ton of reinforcement. And these 3 categories are very easy to expand upon after they get over the largest hurdle, which in my opinion is to understand that pressing a button allows them to control outcomes.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, I'm not sure if Federico is back yet. Federico, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I've had
Fantastic.
some technical issues.
Okay, so we've got some catching up to do. First, I'd love to hear your 1 to 2 sentence take on the buttons in general. And then, of course, your lab is currently carrying out the largest ever study on pet button use. So I would love to hear more about that research, how you're approaching the science of these buttons in that very rigorous scientific way, and what you've found so far.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Well, clearly I'm biased towards the buttons. I started being skeptical and thinking, maybe they can learn to associate a few things, but does it really lead to any kind of interesting insight? And then, of course, once I started seeing some pets doing quite impressive things, I was like, maybe it is worth taking a look. And I think the beauty of it was that it wasn't just 1, 2, 3 dogs, but it was actually many thousands and cats as well. And so over time, we got to develop a study that has more than 10,000 dogs and 700 cats right now. And participants were just willing to share sort of what was going on in terms of, the training and, of course, the button pressing. Some of them let us put cameras in their homes so that we could film their pets and them interacting with them, and also participate in experiments and now training studies. So we've been doing quite a bit of work over the years. Among the first things that we could document was that something that maybe for many owners is not surprising. So they do understand what some of these buttons stand for or mean, so that when you press outside, they know what it means. And when you press play, they go and retrieve a toy so that they can play. I mean, that's not really surprising, but it was interesting because we could show that their response was the same they would have if the owner would just say play or outside. They seem to respond to the buttons in the same way. We could show that they can actually, they use buttons intentionally and they tend to press certain buttons more than others. Dogs, for example, press things like play, outside, treat more often than any other button. Cats have similar buttons. Funny enough, they also have no in the top 5, and settle, meaning calm down, told to the human, which dogs do not have among their top buttons. But they could also combine them in non-random ways. And that is the thing that we're very intrigued by and we want to learn more about. Of course, it could be because they've learned it. They've been trained this way, but it is also possible that they start combining things in ways that try to convey more complex thoughts. And I think that's sort of an exciting new challenge. The last thing I want to say is a paper that's going to come out soon. We could show that they can also learn abstract concepts like help, which I think is particularly important, so that they can actually ask for assistance when they need it. And, we are trying to develop new ways of gathering data beyond the current means. I spent the summer in Europe trying to learn more from my colleagues who do eye tracking, EEG, MRIs. And so hopefully we will start running studies, adding some of these tools to kind of learn more about what these amazing pets are doing.
Such cool work you guys are doing. And I know that you're still recruiting for new participants in the study. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's a longitudinal study, and of course, we're basically looking for talent, right? We're looking for what the average dog can do, but also, if there are outstanding individuals out there, we want to know who they are and what they can do. And so if you are interested in starting the training, or maybe you already started and you would like to join, then please go to my lab website, cclab.ucst.edu. And at the very top, you can see sign up your pet for a study, and please click on it, fill out the form, and we'll get back to you.
Okay, awesome. All right, Heidi, I'm going to come to you next. I know that buttons are a relatively new thing, but they are certainly not the first device that has come out to try to improve animal-human communication. So I would love to get your perspective on how these buttons fit into the larger context of the study of animal communication and animal intelligence, even. You have studied a wide range of animals in a variety of settings. So could you please share a little bit more about the history of this kind of research?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of what I do is sort of in the field of the evolution of language specifically. There's a whole other field which is focusing on communication more broadly. Because language is often seen as one of those things that is uniquely human, it often gathers a different kind of group that is asking those questions about how did it evolve? What do animals have that may or may not be different from what humans have? And the question of talking to animals obviously goes back a very long way, even before Dr. Dolittle, right? So there actually were reports of people bringing apes into their homes and trying to teach them to talk from the late 1800s, pretty much from the moment that apes were introduced to the Western population. Those failed sort of over and over and over again. Even scientists who brought chimpanzees into their homes and raised them alongside their children, that happened for several times. And really minimal kind of word understanding or use. Well, I would say use, because word understanding was not actually studied anything like as much until the gardeners in the 1960s actually had this major breakthrough by looking at, well, maybe chimpanzees just can't use their voices the same way that humans do. And they started teaching a chimpanzee American Sign Language. So that was Washoe, who began sort of an explosion of animal language studies in the late 1960s. And basically, we had Coco, the gorilla, who came out during that same time, Chontek, the orangutan. There were also studies in dolphins, in sea lions, in parrots. There was quite a bit of backlash that I think we'll talk about later, but I want to sort of focus in on this because also, interestingly enough, a long time ago, I actually proposed a study looking at dogs because I'd found this book that was published in 1968 that talked about using regular language around your dog and how your dog could actually understand more than you're giving it credit for and all of that kind of stuff. So I had basically said, well, let's take some of these. So I started working in the late 90s with Lou Herman with the dolphins in Hawaii, and they tested them on comprehension of two artificial languages. And I think to date, those studies are the best examples of syntax in a non-human that has ever come out. And then I did my grad school at the Language Research Center, and this was with bonobos, Kanzi, Panelist, and others who their study was groundbreaking in many ways, but specifically because Kanzi began to use a keyboard sort of very similar to the button system, but it was computerized. You could push the buttons, it would make the noises, everything like that. And he started doing that spontaneously, completely on his own. They were actually trying to train his mom to use it. So this is a case where when Alexis was mentioning associative learning, this was associative learning almost certainly at the beginning. I think all of us start with associative learning, but he was taking it off on his own and he wasn't actually getting a lot of those rewards, but he was seeing, it was observational learning of associations in that case. And then he began responding to English at the level of a 2.5-year-old child. They actually tested him and a 2.5-year-old child with sentences, and even sentences that he had never heard, like put the key in the refrigerator. And he would like look at, see like she was crazy. And like, their key doesn't go in the refrigerator, but like put the key in the refrigerator anyway. So we saw all of these abilities. And my dissertation was actually looking at his vocabulary errors, because when he's asked to push a key on the keyboard and he makes a mistake, that's not just a mistake. It's not a random error. It actually shows a pattern of thought. It shows sort of the representational web in his mind. And Kanzi and Panelist and Pansy, we did 3 of them, showed really, really similar representations to the way humans associate words in their respective languages. So there's a lot of study that shows that language abilities are found outside of humans. Now we can take that, and now Federico is taking that and looking at dogs and looking at what may be different, may be the same. Where can we expand this out into the evolutionary tree? How far does it go? It's all very exciting.
I have a follow-up question for you.
Yes.
I hope that's okay.
Of course.
So I think you're likely well aware of this. Whenever I post about buttons on my channels, the comments are full of skeptics. And I know that animal intelligence research in general has been received by both the public and scientific audiences with mixed reviews. So can you comment a little bit on that skepticism and where do you think pet buttons sit from that perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of skepticism that is well earned. I think that a lot of times animal abilities are shown and maybe are overstated because it gets a lot of attention. One of the most famous cases, of course, was Clever Hans, the horse, who was purported to be able to count and add and divide and subtract. And also less known, he could choose handkerchiefs of specific colors. There were like categorization things that he could do, all of these amazing things. And after careful testing, and had to go through several rounds of testing before they discovered what he was doing was cueing into the body posture of the humans that were around him. So he wasn't doing the test that they thought he was. I mean, it's a very intelligent move on his part to read humans that way, but it's not what they thought it was. Similarly, with the animal language work, there was an enormous backlash. There's this feeling, because we hold language as something that is uniquely human, that if we start saying that other animals have it, then that's somehow diminishing what humanity is, which I don't believe, but I see where that is coming from. And there was a huge pushback, especially from the linguistic community, who at that time really believed that language was embedded in the brain somewhere. And it was some sort of change that had happened evolutionary in human brains and only humans had it. And therefore to say that apes had anything like it was very threatening. So they actually created like a whole symposium that was just there to try and debunk the animal language work. They had the amazing Randy come out and talk about how data can be faked. I talked to my mentor, Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, and she was like, they were basically they brought us there to call us frauds. And even Irene Pepperberg, who worked with the parrots, was very similar. She was like, it was the worst experience of my entire life. Like, it was just terrible. And I think a lot of that skepticism rebounds until today. I think Federico got to experience it, and especially coming from outside of the language world, and then all of a sudden being part of the people who are sort of pushing this idea of maybe they have some language abilities. There's a lot of blowback that you don't get in any other field. And we have to be extra careful with what we say so that we can back up every claim that we make. And I think that scares a lot of people off from studying in this field because it is very hard. I mean, it's very sad because it does limit what we can do, especially with things like these buttons where we can bring that in. We can have information like what I was saying. What I would most like to know is if my dog is sick. If there was a button that they could tell me that they were sick, that's not threatening humanity in any way, shape, or form. That's just giving me a better interaction with my pet, who I've brought into my home and taken the responsibility for. So I think that skepticism has a very important place in science, and we do need to be careful about what we claim for our animals, but we also have to be open to the possibilities that maybe these data are showing something that we didn't expect, and that's only scientific. You have to have that open mind. You have to be humble. You have to be willing to change your mind. Otherwise, you're not doing science.
Such a great point. Federico, would you like to weigh in on your take on this question and also maybe what you're doing with your studies to ensure that you are controlling them and removing sources of bias as much as possible?
Absolutely. This is such a fantastic question. I think first I want to second the point that Heidi raised, which is like skepticism is part of the scientific approach, right? So we cannot start by assuming that, anything is true. You start with the idea that there's nothing there. The null hypothesis is that there is no difference, that there is no effect. And then you try to test and see if there is actually an effect or if you detect something that is meaningful. So, for example, in our studies, we pre-register all our studies so that before we even go looking or run experiments and so on, we basically tell the scientific community, this is what we're going to do. This is the sample we're going to use. This is the kind of controls we're going to run, which is now, an approach that has been adopted by most people doing, for example, cognitive research. So that it kind of prevents the bias of trying afterwards to find something that you can put up. The other thing that we try to do, of course, is that we try to look at large samples, right? So that we are not just looking at one or two individuals, but we try to look at hundreds, thousands. And we try to do it so that we don't necessarily tell them, hey, we're going to look at your data right now. But it's like, you just submit the data and then we kind of use criteria to select individuals to kind of look at more closely at some of them. And of course, we try to be careful because the last thing we want is to make claims that we cannot back up, right? At the same time, dogs are amazing, and cats too, by the way, but dogs are amazing in that we know that there are few individuals out there that can learn words pretty well. There are documented scientific papers. There's an entire project called the Gifted Dog Project in Hungary that has a few dogs that show that they can learn words pretty easily. And Brian and many others have done amazing studies showing that this is possible. I just wanted to add one note, especially because we had just lost Jane Goodall. So many people know that she loved chimps, but not many people know that actually her favorite animal were dogs. And she did say that one of the things that shaped her approach to chimps was the fact that she knew that dogs were intelligent, dogs have personalities. She knew that not every dog is the same as any other dog out there. And I think it kind of allowed her to go into the field and look at chimps with an open mind and trying to see, how similar or different they can be from us, but also from other animals that she was familiar with. And I think that's the idea that I would like to share with everybody, which is, if we go look at animals with the assumption that they're less than us in every domain, then for sure, we'll look for that and we will be biased that way. Or we can try to go look at them and trying to find ways to document what they can do. We know that they're better than us in different things. For example, dogs can smell things much better than us, and other animals can see things better than us, can hear things better than us. I'll never forget, I was in the field with baboons and I hear them producing an alarm call about leopards. And I had not seen the leopard, but clearly there was a leopard and they had seen it. And so I was just like, you want to know what it is that they can see, they can hear, they can smell. And so if we try to approach it with the idea that maybe they're not worse than us in every domain, but they're different, then we can possibly learn something. And then we can try to document what it is that they can do and what it is that maybe they can't do. And it's our job to sort of do due diligence and kind of go as far as we can in showing the intelligence that is out there and that is shared species and not just, in the human species.
I love that perspective. And that is a great segue to our next question for Brian. So we've talked a lot so far about the button use, which is kind of asking dogs to communicate with us the way that we are comfortable communicating. I know you have done a tremendous amount of work on dog behavior and dog communication outside of the context of buttons. So I would love to hear more about that work. And I've done some great stuff with puppies and dingoes, and just what's your perspective on the human-dog relationship and communication outside of the button context?
Well, I think what's really exciting about the buttons is it's all about dogs producing communication. They're making requests. They're indicating things that they want or that they might be searching for or whatever. My research is really focused more on comprehension. So do dogs actually comprehend what humans are trying to indicate or intend for them? What humans want them to understand about the world and what they might want to do next. And so that's where we were able to show that dogs have a really special genius relative to primates, relative to wolves. Young dogs, even right after weaning, seem to come into the world prepared to really comprehend our gestures and our intentions of what we want and how they might interact with us that way. So that, me being able to tell you that took about 20 years. And traveling, to Congo and Siberia and, all sorts of crazy things. I just came back from Australia working with dingoes to further examine this. But the punchline is the genius of dogs that we think evolved as a result of domestication that allows them to understand us so well is this reading of intentions in our actions and gestures so they can understand what it is we want and how they can learn about the world and in ways that other animals can't. So the buttons take it to a whole nother level, though, because in human development, if you are able to communicate via human language, you all went through a stage of comprehending gestures around 9 to 12 months. And as that begins, it's sort of the first moment where you see into the minds of others and you can ask questions like, oh, you want something or you see something that I don't see. You know things that I may not know. And after that stage is a much even greater jump where you start producing things. You start pointing to others, you start asking questions, you start, trying to make requests, et cetera. And so even in human development, production of requests, the production of, communication is thought to be much more complex and challenging. And so that's why the buttons are so interesting, because, it hasn't really been the case that with pets, whether it's dogs or cats, that, we have had a really easy way to make a lot of progress. And what I love about the buttons is, as divisive as Heidi talking about the history of, animal language research may have been in the past, my hope for the future is one of the problems, and Federico already really hammered this in his approach, is one of the problems in the past was because we were looking at great apes, they're endangered, unfortunately, and there were very few individuals that could be studied or were studied or could be afforded to be studied, et cetera. But because this is like a citizen science project with everybody working together to study their pets, we have a type of scientific power we didn't normally have. And so there really is the possibility to make some progress where it was difficult in the past. So I would say it's pretty fun to think about, and I'm going to be following with great excitement. And I can't wait to learn how to use these buttons with my dog, I guess.
So for those that aren't using the buttons, do you have any tips based on your years of experience for how owners can communicate better with their pet dogs?
How to communicate better with your pet dog. Well, the first thing is just to know that your dog is, dogs in particular, and nothing against cats. I haven't done the research, so I don't know. As a scientist, if I put my science hat on, I have to, tell you what I do or don't know. I'm sure cats can do it as a person. I imagine cats are remarkable too, but I don't know as a scientist. And so I can tell you that as a scientist, there is wonderful evidence that your dog is really good understanding you and trying to pick up what you're trying to communicate. And I guess the main thing to say is they're working hard to try to, read what it is you want. And yes, there are problems in the relationship potentially, but I think that's a lot about our expectations that have radically changed over the last few decades. Because we're asking our dogs to do things and cats to do things that, it wasn't really expected even 30, 40, 50 years ago. My childhood dog ran around the neighborhood and, he could just go wherever he wanted. He came home at night and we played on the weekends and whatever. My current dog, stays inside. He has timeouts in crates. We take him on walks, but the expectation is that when there are people come over, he's not going to bark at them. He's going to be friendly and he's going to meet new dogs and be friendly. I mean, these are all things that we are expecting of our dogs that is a new thing. And they haven't evolved in 30 years somehow in a new way. And so I think the buttons are a fun new technique maybe to help us with our dogs to, maybe meet halfway with these new expectations we have.
I love that. And I think that's such a great point about how much we are expecting of our pets. And I think it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, that people tend to underestimate how much dogs are picking up on, and that likely leads to problems because we're training things that we don't even know that we're training sometimes. All right, we are going to switch gears a bit and circle back to a topic that came up at the beginning of the panel. I think Alexis and Heidi both brought up pain in pets, and interestingly, both video examples that we showed, of course, dealt with pets expressing some discomfort. So I'd love to hear from both Alexis and Heidi, but Alexis, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts about the role that buttons can play, particularly when it comes to communicating about pain or some of these other needs that pets maybe don't have as clear of a way to express without the buttons?
Yeah. That video that you shared at the beginning was sort of the moment for me where I realized the true potential of these systems and what they could offer. When I first started, I was like, okay, yeah, she'll be able to say in English that she wants to go outside, which is not something that I wouldn't be able to know without the buttons, right? Dogs are communicating all the time very clearly. We can learn so much from them just by watching how they move through the world naturally. But when she was able to very specifically tell me where she was in pain, it sort of opened up new worlds to me. And now I get messages every day from other pet guardians. My cat said potty ouch. We took him to the vet. They had a bladder infection. My dog said bone ouch. They weren't finishing their bone. They had jaw cancer and we caught it early enough because of that. Or ouch smell and there was a gas leak. I mean, all of these things are massive. And these are things that I think it would be tricky, as Heidi was mentioning, dogs are very good at concealing their pain. That's an evolutionary tactic for staying alive, right? So for them to have this ability and to see that trust as well in them using the buttons to request help when they're in pain is incredibly powerful. And it's one of the most impactful things that has come out of the buttons for me. And I think the more we are using the buttons, the more we're able to learn really nuanced things about our pets, their preferences. Bunny, for example, I didn't know anything about dogs when I got Bunny. And I was like, dogs like to walk and they like to eat. That's what they do, right? And then we give them pets, and that's what happens in a household with dogs. Bunny doesn't like to go for walks. She'd rather like sit on the deck and observe the birds. And I could have learned this by observing her body language over years and years, but she just told me, and I knew it sooner. I think that humans can get so stuck in our human brains that we forget to try and look at the world through the eyes of someone who smells the world, or someone who is able to take in everything that's going on around us in a completely different way, because that's just not our perspective. And this really gives us a way to sort of balance the scales, look through their eyes, and even sometimes button combinations that don't make sense. They just get us thinking, what could this mean? What should I be looking for? What words could I give my learner that might help them better express whatever they're trying to express? And it's a system that scaffolds on itself. So the more we're listening, the more they're expressing, the more they're feeling heard, which is inherently reinforcing, the more we are motivated to continue with this type of communication.
I love that. Those are some really powerful examples you shared of pets using the buttons to communicate pain. Heidi, did you have anything to add to that topic?
I mean, I think that's absolutely correct and absolutely perfect. But also I want to say, I think that there is a tendency for people to either think of dogs as being very simplistic, sort of mechanistic machines, or little people in fursuits. And the truth is, exactly as Alexis was saying, is they're neither of those things. They're completely their own thing, and they think in their own way. And as much as I might have wanted to be Dr. Dolittle when I was young, if I'm going into trying to have actual meaningful conversations with a dog, I need to take the dog at the dog's level, right? I can't expect the dog to act like an ape or a dolphin or a child, right? Dogs are dogs, and they have their thing. They like their thing. They have their own personalities. They have very clear wants and needs. My dog, I'm really delighted to be starting again with the buttons. I failed the first time, but I'm going to try again, because I would much rather him go push a button and tell me that there's a toy under the couch than bark in my face, which is what he does right now, right? So they're trying to communicate with you all the time. And this is just another avenue that maybe gets it more specific, allows you to find things sooner, quicker, and have better, clearer understanding with them.
Love that. Okay. So most of the questions we've covered so far came up in the comment section, but now we're going to get into some very specific questions from individual users. So let's start with one that I will direct to Federico. This came from Word Familiars. They asked, the research that has been published so far has been dog-focused. Is there a cat-focused or other non-canine species-focused study in the works? And they really want to know, what's the timeline for publication?
Yes, that's a great question. We have been collecting data with cats for quite a while, and actually we have run some analysis already similar to what we've been doing with the dogs in terms of which buttons they press the most and whether they combine them in ways that are potentially interesting. And luckily for us, the results are positive. So the plan is to actually submit this paper in the next few weeks, and hopefully you will see it out there very soon. I kind of gave a preview of this in a talk that is available online on YouTube recently at Interspecies Internet. So in case you're curious to just get a little glimpse of it, you can take a look. There are other species we're very interested in, as you can imagine. One in particular is wolves. There are centers that have wolves, and they have reached out asking if we could possibly be willing to do some training with them, buttons. We've not started, so I can't say that this will be anytime soon, but it would be interesting to sort of see, if you are training a wolf, how far can they go? And also, is there any systematic difference, where clearly they are probably interested in slightly different things than a pet would be. But the important message is, it's harder to train cats. Everybody who has a cat knows that. which is why we have fewer participants, which is also why we started with the dogs first, because we have more data and it was a lot easier to kind of document what was there. But we are very keen on running some behavioral studies, so actual experiments. So if you have a cat, please do sign up, because we would love to either send our researchers to your home or ask you to participate via Zoom in studies so that we can actually have additional evidence of how smart cats also are.
All right. I am eagerly anticipating those cat papers. All right. Next question seems like a good one for Brian. This is from Bella Miram. They asked, I'd like to ask about how I interact with my dog. With people, I show affection through things like hugging, kissing, and playful interactions, but I know dogs communicate very differently from humans. When I hug or kiss my dog, does he feel uncomfortable or even violated and simply tolerate my behavior, or does he just not interpret it the way I do?
So Annie, thanks for the question. One of the things that we touched on a little bit is individual differences. So dogs have different temperaments. People have been able to measure a variety of different types of personalities. So one of the domains of personality for dog would be sociability, like how much do they want to be with other people, how much do they want to interact with other people, even be physically close to people versus dogs. So the first thing to know is that not all dogs are the same. And so some dogs are going to be really cuddly and huggy, and then some dogs not so much. And that's okay. And so really it's all about, reading the signals, or if your dog is button trained, they can just tell you, hey, why don't you knock it off? But, in my own home, where we have a dog who often is not that huggy, if we're hugging on him, he just gets up and moves and is like, yeah, no, I'm done. And we just know, like, okay, yeah, you don't want to hang out right now. That's cool. And, another way to know is if a dog is just wagging their tail and, having a great time and you're hugging on them, that's probably a wonderful thing. You're probably having a good time too. And obviously, we know that there's some evidence for a really interesting interspecies neurohormonal response to social interaction between humans and dogs, where the same hormone, oxytocin, that leads to bonding and parent offspring in humans, it also is interacting when you're together with a dog. And so, there really is a physical instantiation to say that, sure, the hormone that causes love in humans or makes that feeling of love, it exists between you and your dog too. So, I think it's okay to hug on your dog and you're definitely not tormenting them. But if they're getting up and leaving, that might be a hint. Maybe they're done.
Sorry, if I can interject, I was laughing because one of the most common press buttons is all done by dogs. So they don't say no a lot, but they tell you, can we please stop? Let's be done with this.
Actually, I want to jump in too, because one of my favorite bonobo stories was Pam Anisha, who was a much more reserved kind of personality. And if you were talking to her and trying to get her to do something, sometimes she would just reach over and push quiet. Shut up, we're done.
Bunny does that too. She uses settle sound to tell people or other animals to be quiet. And when she was blowing up online and we would have like film crews and TV crews down at her house, she'd be like, all done, go bye stranger. She'd be like, we are done with this interview. And they got offended. And I think that's okay.
Was settle sound a combination she came up with, or did you teach her that?
No, that was a combination she came up with. That's one of the most interesting things is these the combinatorial usage of words in ways that has clear meaning based on context again and again that I never would have come up with. Like subtle sound and, oh, wow, am I going to be able to think of any more right now? Night talk sleep was what she was using before we added a dream button. She would talk sleep, night talk sleep. Stranger paw, the use of stranger as for an object instead of how I had modeled it, which was like, this is a dog you don't know or a person you don't know, stranger. So, and that's across the board. There are learners that are coming up with the same combinations to mean the same thing too. Like bone water for ice cube. I think there are multiple learners who have done that. Squeaker car, multiple learners have used that for a siren, like an ambulance. It's wild.
That's so interesting. I wish this panel was lasting like 5 hours so we could talk about all. Alexis, we'll continue with you for the next question. Megan Harrigan asks, I love this question. I'm curious if the way animals communicate through buttons tends to match up with the way their owners assumed their personality was originally?
That's such a great question. And I think it's sort of a chicken or the egg question, because the way Bunny started communicating with Buttons informed what words I would give her, which then informed how I viewed her sort of personal narrative, right? So was it the case that her personality shined through with the Buttons, or that I was giving her Buttons based on her personality to begin with? My baseline response is that my 3 dogs as individuals communicate very much in the ways that I assume they would. Bunny is sort of an existentialist. She asks a lot of why questions. Otter uses the buttons only for evil. Like he'll use the buttons. If Bunny has a bone, he'll go to the board and he'll say, go outside. And I'll be like, oh, good boy. You very rarely use the buttons. I'll walk to the door. Then Bunny walks to the door. Then he goes and steals her bone, right? So he uses the buttons in that way. Or if I'm giving her scritches, he'll be like, scritches now. And I'll be like, oh my God, good job. And he's like, ha ha ha, I got her. And then Tenrek just screams his name at me all day. So to me, this tracks very much with who they are. But I think if you asked different humans, you would get different responses to that. I'm sure that people are being surprised every single day by what their learners are saying and what they're learning about them and how they're connecting, because that's sort of what this process does. That's what it gives us.
Thank you. Next one, shoot to Heidi, although Brian, you may have something to say about this as well. So Lee Wade 87 asks, well, first they state, I want the cat who will knock on the door with its hind leg, or that one in Russia whose owner rigged up a doorbell. Is that learned, or are they just genius cats?
Yeah, I mean, that's a learned behavior. Like we've been talking about this whole time. One of the most basic forms of learning is associative learning, and we've harnessed it through operant conditioning. Early on, it was called the law of effect by Edward Thorndike. And this question reminds me of a story about Thorndike, because a lot of his studies were actually putting cats into puzzle boxes. And so he would put a cat into a puzzle box and there'd be a number of different ways they could get free and get the food that was outside the puzzle box. And there was a story that happened one time, I cannot find it again, but I know it's out there somewhere, that a cat accidentally backed into a lever that opened the door and they got out and was eating the food. And from then on, everything they did was backwards. They were backing up into everything inside the puzzle box, right? And the law of effect is basically, if you do something and it works and you get a reward out of it, you get some sort of reinforcement, you're going to repeat it. You're going to do it much more often. And so cats that are knocking on doors and are getting outside are going to knock on doors more often. And cats that have been taught that if you ring this doorbell, the door opens and that's what you want, that's what's going to happen. And the same thing happens because my dog does this too, where he barks to go outside so that I open the door so that the other dog goes outside and he can go steal his spot on the couch, right? Like I get the couch by barking at this door and then Dio goes outside and I go steal his spot. So yeah, I think, are they geniuses? I mean, in some ways, sure, they're very intelligent. That's a really cool move. But are they especially super smart? Probably not. They have just learned the right thing at the right time.
All right. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say quickly that what's fun about the question, is X animal a genius? Is that even scientifically tractable? And, can I actually do an experiment and demonstrate that one individual might be different than others in terms of their intelligence? And I would just say, yes, it is tractable. We have papers, colleagues that have papers where lots of different chimpanzees, for instance, were tested on a whole host of different cognitive tasks. And there were 1 or 2 individuals out of hundreds that really could solve everything. And were many standard deviations above the pack. And so they wrote a paper about there's a genius chimpanzee in Uganda named Natasha who lives on Ngamba Island, and good luck trying to give her a problem she can't solve.
Love that perspective. Thank you. So we are close to the end of the hour already. Time flew by. I'm sure I speak for the panel when I say that this could go on forever. So maybe we'll do another one. This conversation has been so much fun and enlightening. I loved hearing all of you speak so passionately and with your expertise on this topic. So thank you. So as we wrap things up again in the next 5 minutes, I'd love to get a parting thought from each of you. Alexis, Brian, Heidi, Federico, what is a piece of advice you would give to pet parents looking to better communicate with their animals? Start with you, Alexis.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first thing is to learn your individual's language, right? We can't start by assuming that they are going to speak ours. The onus is on us to understand them first. So they're communicating all the time. How are they communicating? There are sort of a set of behaviors that we've defined within dogs, lip lick, tail tuck, ears back, those sorts of things. And those are going to vary. The meanings are going to vary from individual to individual. So just spend a lot of time getting to know the individual. What do they like? What do they look at? What do they sniff? Where do they want to go? Whose butt are they smelling longest? All of these things are going to help you to understand them and their preferences. And then, I obviously am an advocate for buttons because I feel like there is so much that you can learn about the individual by giving them as many methods to communicate as possible. So use everything in the possible toolbox to really create that connection and the communication that you want.
I love that. Let's go to Brian next. What's your tip for people looking to communicate better with their pets?
Well, I've been raising a lot of service dog puppies, so I have that kind of perspective on all this. And I would just say it's remarkable what dogs already can do when they're incredibly young. And I will say one of the things that I think if we could teach a puppy to use these buttons, and what they would push and say is they would say, when I'm crying in the middle of the night before 14 weeks of age, I really do have to go to the bathroom. I'm not trying to manipulate you. Don't worry about it. Please take me out to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And that's a very important welfare message. I think a lot of dogs and a lot of dog owners are confused about. Maybe their dogs are trying to deceive them when they're puppies. Before 14 weeks, please take your dog out to the bathroom in the middle of the night.
Very important tip. Thank you. Heidi, what's your advice?
Yeah, so I think that the sort of watching and paying attention is the most important thing. And I think our tendency in the crazy world that we live in is we're constantly running and going and moving and doing, and our dogs are kind of there sometimes in the background. And if we want to be able to communicate better with our pets, then we have to make sure that they are foregrounded and that we slow down and we take the time and we watch them and interact with them. Even if there are other distractions going on, if their needs and wants are sort of centered, we have a much better chance of being able to understand what they need and what they want.
Yes, I think that is outstanding advice and such a great reminder in this very busy world. Federico, we'll finish up with you. What is your tip?
The first thing I would say is something that's already been said. It's kind of listening, right? So paying attention and tuning in. The other thing I would say is that, part of developing relationship is spending time together and doing fun things together. And that can be, going to the park and playing, can also be doing training. And I think, a lot of people see training as a chore or something you do as a solution to a problem that you have detected. But training can be a way of sort of developing routines together or learning how to do things together and bonding. So I think there's many ways in which you can develop relationship by trying to do something with them and try something that is fun for you, that is fun for them, and paying attention to the signals that they give you. It doesn't need to be buttons. Obviously, buttons is one thing I care about, but there's many other things you can do. And I think as long as you try to give them a chance and listen, then they will show you what they want and what they need.
That is a great note to end on. Thank you, Federico. And to those of you watching, thank you for spending part of your day with us and for playing a role in giving your pets a voice. At Purina, we know the power of pets. Better understanding their needs is only going to strengthen the bond that we have with them and the impact that they'll have on our lives. I hope that all of you have a wonderful weekend, and please stay tuned to the pet expert updates that we provide at Purina and that each of these experts will deliver through their own channels. Thanks.